With Trump's second term off to a strong start, in this video we'll be taking a look at the 2026 Senate map and seeing where Republicans can continue to make gains in Congress. Trump's current approval sits at 49.4%, disapprove at 43.2%. Trump is more popular right now than at any point in his political career thus far, and this bodes very well for Republicans as the midterm approaches. Returning to the map here, the Senate is looking very different than it did 6 years ago when these seats were up for election in 2020. After the 2020 Senate races, we had a split 50-50 Senate. This is what Joe Biden had going into his first term in office. However, looking at 2026, Republicans are starting off with a significant advantage. They have 53 seats, Democrats at 47. Republicans can lose 3 seats and still maintain the Senate majority. But unfortunately for Democrats right now, there isn't really a single vulnerable Republican-held seat. However, there are a handful of Democrats that are in shaky positions. So we're going to start off with the solid seats for both parties. These seats will go either to the Democrats or the Republicans by 12 points or more. This is essentially where you have solid incumbents running for re-election in safe blue or safe red states. Starting off with the safe states for the GOP, we have Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, South Dakota, Nebraska, Kansas, Oklahoma, and Texas. This is where John Cornyn will be up for re-election, and considering Trump's strong performance in the Lone Star State in 2024, there's no doubt Republicans will hold on to the Senate seat, probably by a solid margin. We also have Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Tennessee, Kentucky, West Virginia, and South Carolina. And so with these solid Republican seats filled in, the GOP is at 47, just 3 away from the 50 minimum that they need. Now, for Democrats, a lot of safe seats in 2020 or maybe even 2022 are no longer safe for them, as we saw in the 2024 election, with numerous solid blue states taking significant shifts to the right. States like New Jersey, New York, Illinois, they simply aren't as liberal as they were even just a few years ago. However, there are 5 solid blue states on this map. We have Oregon with Jeff Merkley, Dick Durbin in Illinois. He's probably the only Democrat right now that can win a statewide race in Illinois by a solid margin. We also have Massachusetts, Rhode Island, and Delaware. So with the solid states filled in, Republicans at 47, Democrats at 39. And you can see right off the bat, the GOP is in a much stronger position. Moving on now to the likely states. These races will be decided by margins of 5 to 12 percentage points. They're going to be more competitive than the safe states, but it would still be a pretty big surprise if they voted the other way. So we're going to start off in the Midwest with Iowa. Joni Ernst is running for re-election. There are a lot of Republicans that want to primary her. If Trump endorses another candidate in the primary, it's unlikely she'll end up on the ballot, but right now she is expected to be renominated and will win re-election. Even if Republicans go with someone else, this is Iowa is going to go red no matter who the Republican nominee is. So it's going to be likely for the GOP. And then in Alaska, Dan Sullivan is also running for a third term, just like Ernst. Now, Sullivan is probably going to win the Republican primary, but his issue is Mary Peltola, who was the congresswoman elected in 2022 in Alaska in a statewide vote. It was a rather impressive victory for Democrats. She's definitely the best person they have. Even then, I do expect her to lose. She lost in 2024 to Nick Begich, but of course, that was a very good year for Republicans. But I do not expect Democrats to recover by 2026, and so Alaska is also going to be likely red no matter who the Democrats choose to nominate. The other 2 seats that will go to Republicans by at least 5 points are currently held by unelected senators. They were appointed just a few days ago. We're going to start off in Ohio. John Husted, he was appointed by Governor Mike DeWine to replace J.D. Vance, and he is likely to win his re-election by a likely margin. And then down in Florida, we have Ashley Moody. She was, of course, appointed by Governor Ron DeSantis to succeed Marco Rubio, who became the Secretary of State. And if she is renominated, she will, of course, win. Florida is no longer a competitive state, and Moody should be on track for a re-election victory. Next up, we have the likely blue states for Democrats, 5 to 12 point margins once again. I'm going to start off with Colorado and New Mexico. In Colorado, John Hickenlooper is on track to win a second term. He was first elected back in 2020. Same for Ben Ray Lujan. He was first elected in 2020 as well, defeating Tom Udall. He is probably going to run again and be able to win a second term in office. He has not announced any plans to retire. He has had some health issues during his time in the Senate, but as of right now, the expectation is that he will win a second term. Up in the Northeast, we have Jeanne Shaheen in New Hampshire, and then in Colorado, we have Cory Booker. Both Democrats are expected to win their re-elections, both elected over a decade ago. And so New Hampshire and New Jersey, both likely blue. And so with the solid and likely seats now filled in, Republicans are at 51, Democrats at 43. I expect all the results I filled in so far to basically be a lock. Republicans are definitely going to hold on to the Senate majority. The last few Senate cycles have been rather competitive. I mean, 2020, 2022, 2024 was thought to be competitive as well until Republicans absolutely wiped the floor with many of the incumbent Democrats. I mean, John Tester is gone, Sherrod Brown is gone, Bob Casey is gone. That was a big surprise. And of course, we also saw Joe Manchin announce his retirement before he even entered the primary. So 4 incumbent Democrats that were ousted in 2024. We're probably going to see a few more in 2026. We also do have some retirements on top of that we'll get into in just a few minutes. But there are 2 lean Democratic states that I currently do not expect to be among the most competitive, and these are the 2 seats in Minnesota and Virginia. In Minnesota, Tina Smith is likely to run for re-election. She would be the favorite. She's probably going to win a second term, but it will be very, very close. Of course, we saw the presidential election in Minnesota go down to a lean margin, and that was with Tim Walz, the state's governor, on the ballot with Kamala Harris. So Minnesota is going to be lean for the Democrats. I'm expecting a 1 to 5 point margin. Same thing in Virginia, where Mark Warner is running for re-election. There is some talk about Governor Glenn Youngkin, who will be term limited after 2025, if he'll run for this seat. If he does, that would be really bad news for Democrats. It would be competitive. It would not be a shoo-in for Youngkin, but as of right now, Mark Warner is looking okay, and the state is going to be lean Democrat. And now we're left with the 4 most competitive seats of the 2026 cycle. There's a lot of uncertainty here in Michigan, Maine, North Carolina, and Georgia. A lot of them we don't even know who's actually going to be running, but we will start off with North Carolina. This one, we had the least amount of uncertainty here relative to the others. Thom Tillis is likely to run for re-election to a 3rd term. He defeated Cal Cunningham narrowly in 2020, and that was only because Cal Cunningham was exposed to be cheating on his wife a month before the election. If that had not happened, Cal Cunningham probably would have been elected to the U.S. Senate. Now, Thom Tillis is definitely the weaker of the 2 senators from the Tar Heel state, Ted Budd being the other one elected in 2022. Thom Tillis is likely to face significant primary challenges. He isn't the biggest supporter of Donald Trump, and if Trump decides to nominate another candidate in that primary, Thom Tillis is done for. He isn't even that popular among his Republican supporters that like him despite his opposition to the president. And so Thom Tillis, if he's renominated, I do expect him to win by a narrow margin. Democrats couldn't do it in 2020. 2026 is probably not when it's going to happen. Even if Republicans go with someone else, they are still favored in North Carolina. North Carolina voted for Trump by a lean margin after he won it in both 2016 and 2020. It generally is still slightly more Republican than Democrat, except when Republicans cannot nominate the right candidates like they did with Mark Robinson in the governor's race in 2024. I mean, he got absolutely destroyed by Josh Stein, and so North Carolina is going to be lean red. Up in Maine, Susan Collins is up for re-election. There's no doubt that this is going to be an exciting one. Susan Collins is currently in her 5th term in office. She is the longest serving member of Congress in the history of Maine. She is relatively popular there, although among Republicans, she is not as well liked as she has been in the past. She voted against the confirmation of Pete Hegseth for defense secretary, and if you look at her results from 2020, she was able to win by 8.6%. This seems pretty good, but what you have to consider is that this was a race where Sarah Gideon was expected to win by basically the same margin. It was Gideon plus 10 all the way until election day, but somehow Susan Collins came out with an 8.6% victory. Now, before this, she was able to win very comfortably by 37 points in 2014. Democrats poured a lot of money into this race 4 years ago. They're going to do it again in 2 years, but if Republicans go with Susan Collins, they are likely to win. If they go with anyone else, Maine is definitely more liberal than it is conservative. It would be dumb for Republicans to choose someone else, even if they don't like Susan Collins, because if you're a Republican, you should think that a Republican vote is better than one from a Democrat, even if that Republican doesn't always fall in line with the presidential administration. And so Susan Collins, her seat, I'm currently going to classify as lean red. If they go with her, she has a very good chance of winning. If they don't, then Republicans will likely have made a mistake. In Georgia, we have another exciting one. This is the election where Jon Ossoff will be on the ballot. Jon Ossoff was elected in 2020, along with Raphael Warnock, who was reelected in 2022. The 2020 election for Warnock was a special election. Jon Ossoff defeated Republican one-term incumbent David Perdue 4 years ago. He is seen as a relatively strong incumbent on the Democratic side, but this is the state of Georgia. It will be difficult for any Democrat to win, no matter how popular they are. And there is a lot of talk about Brian Kemp running for this seat. He's the current governor, and he will be term limited in 2026. He's very popular in the state of Georgia, and there's no doubt in my mind that he would be able to defeat Jon Ossoff in a head-to-head matchup. Now, if it's someone else, Ossoff's chances go up quite a bit, but even then, Georgia is a red state. This is going to be a competitive race, and so considering everything together, I will say Republicans are slightly favored, although a lot of that will depend on who they choose to nominate, who actually runs, and Ossoff's performance in the campaign. But right now, Georgia is going to be lean Republican. I can see them winning this seat by around 2 to 3 points. And finally, up in Michigan, this is going to be, in my opinion, the most competitive race in the country, and that is because incumbent Democratic Senator Gary Peters has chosen not to run for re-election. This is the first retirement announcement for the 2026 cycle. Gary Peters was first elected in 2014, narrowly re-elected in a race that was closer than expected in 2020 against John James. John James is now serving in the House of Representatives, but he ran a very good campaign against Gary Peters. If he's a Republican nominee in 2026, I think he has a pretty good chance to actually win the seat. Now, with Gary Peters gone, Democrats will no longer have the incumbency advantage in Michigan, a state that they lost in the 2024 presidential election. Michigan is an incredibly competitive state. A lot of people thought the Democrats were going to hold on to it, but in the end, Donald Trump came out with a 1 to 2 point victory. It was a rather strong victory, better than his margin from 2016. And so Democrats, without Gary Peters, they're in a much worse position in Michigan. If Republicans can run a strong candidate, I will say that they are favored. I mean, just look at the map from 2024. The election was incredibly close between Alyssa Slotkin and Mike Rogers. This was after Debbie Stabenow, the incumbent, decided not to run for re-election. And Mike Rogers, I mean, he barely received any funding from the RNC, and he still came within half a percentage point of winning. He would be another very strong candidate for Republicans in 2 years. And so Michigan, I'm currently going to classify as tilt Republican. Democrats do have a slight advantage considering the fact that they do hold the seat right now, but ultimately I do see Republicans being able to take it. And so this is my first ever 2026 Senate map prediction. Republicans at a whopping 55 seats, Democrats at 45 after 4 flips in 2024. Republicans are also on track to take both Michigan and Georgia if things continue to go the way they are, if Trump continues to maintain this solid approval and Republicans choose the right candidates for the right races. Thank you guys so much for watching. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe right now for more content just like this, and I'll see you guys in the next video.